Welcome to the Art Channel. In this film, we'll be visiting an exhibition of work by the American artist Robert Rauschenberg. Rauschenberg lived between 1925 and 2008. He's regarded as one of the 20th century's most pivotal artists. Monogram, made between 1955 and 1959, is arguably Rauschenberg's most iconic and famous work. And its theatricality, its shock, perhaps explains why. We're looking at an Angora goat that he sourced from a mundane office furniture store. And he bought it for $15 and took it back to his studio. But it took him 3 different iterations over 4 years to find a resolution to the dilemma of what do you do with an Angora goat, so that it didn't simply seem as if he was just inserting the goat into an artwork, but rather he's trying to achieve this kind of symbiosis, really.
You're right. I mean, it took him a long, long time to figure it out. And I'm always surprised that he made very meticulous drawings to prepare for the piece of work. I think Jasper Johns, who was in the studio upstairs, they consulted on a regular basis, and John still has that early drawing. So it's not a kind of a casual piece thrown together in any way. There's a lot of thought that's gone into it. And initially, I think the goat was to go in front of a more traditional painting hung on a wall. But putting the painting on the floor makes it operate between sculpture and painting, which is really quite exciting. And on the face of this little goat, lots of abstract, expressionist, beautiful, gestural kind of paint marks.
This is, again, part of the series of combines, combining sculptural and painterly characteristics. Rauschenberg is behaving like the iconoclast he always was. He's breaking through those boundaries, those definitions, those constrictions that he rebelled against from his early years at Black Mountain College. And this work really shoehorns together so many sort of odd and jarring sort of contradictions. We've got a shirt sleeve there, the heel from a shoe. We've got the goat stuffed through, wedged into this rubber tire. And there's a lot of interpretation around what this Angora goat actually represents. What do you think?
Lots of things, I'm not sure, but I'm amused that it has seemingly left behind a tennis ball. Yes. So there are lots of references. Yeah. This is serious fun, and you can understand why, when it was shown Leo Castelli in New York, people were absolutely outraged by this object. Some amused, but some completely outraged. And I think you mentioned Black Mountain College, which is quite interesting. He trained under Joseph Albers. This very, this iconic colorist, this purist in a way. And Rauschenberg says that, he basically did everything that Albers told him not to. So he rebelled against that. And still you have this fantastic rebellion happening here.
It's so transitional, isn't it? It's unfixed, it's in flow. And that's what makes it kind of charged and electric. This goat stuffed through the tire, I mean, it's sort of cheeky, isn't it? It's a mischievous goat, but at the same time, the goat becomes a kind of a victim of this sort of accident. It's a very peculiar work, but nevertheless, it's astonishing and exciting, and it becomes, lastly, a kind of stage. Instead of a painting on the wall hung vertically, here we've got a horizontal platform that feels as if it's an arena in which to act.
And 50 years before Damien Hirst.
Yes, absolutely.
Here we're standing in front of Gold Standard, which is the last of Rauschenberg's combines made in 1964 while he was on tour in Japan with the Merce Cunningham Dance Company. And the way it's produced is extraordinary. It was made on stage in a way in response to the idea of an interview.
Well, it really embodies, doesn't it, Rauschenberg's interest in performance and collaboration. But at the heart of this piece is a kind of resistance too, because he's being asked questions, and his sole response is to work on this combine created on a traditional gold-backed Japanese folding screen.
He took the screen on stage, as you say, and he took a black frame off the screen, and then started by splashing it with black and white paint, and then adding all these objects which he'd found on the streets of Tokyo. So we have workmen's boots, we have the little his master's voice dog sitting on a bicycle seat, very kind of Duchamp, something from roadworks, a Coca-Cola bottle, alarm clock. So all these objects which he gives really great status in a way.
Well, it appears quite anarchic, doesn't it? But at the same time, it's very intuitive. And Rauschenberg really values this idea of responding to the world in these combines, of being able to accumulate material that reflects where he is, the specific time, and more importantly, the wider culture. In this case, Japan, which was quite kind of foreign to him. You know, he was encountering it for the first time. So these are still so kind of vibrant, these combines. They're so exciting and dynamic. And they push art in this wholly new direction. So, you know, it's a critical work. And it really sort of illustrates Rauschenberg's achievements as an artist.
I think, as you say, he wanted art to reflect real life, and he said famously, I want my art pieces to look like things outside my window rather than things inside my studio. So he is responding to being a tourist, a newcomer in Tokyo, and it's very eclectic. He kind of updates this idea of the objet trouvé, and you're right, it's still challenging, it's still refreshing.
Well, it's the last major combine that he made before he moves on to the screen print paintings. And so it's a kind of end point, a climax really, to this investigation in the found ready-made object, which he then kind of animates and choreographs into this extraordinary ensemble.
We're standing in front of a piece of work called Retroactive 2, which is part of a series of mixed media pieces. So it's screen print and oil paint on canvas. And as we can see, this is John F. Kennedy, the American president. This was made in 1964, but really interestingly started in 1963, before Kennedy's death. And Rauschenberg had real issues about whether he would use the image and continue with the piece, which he did. And you can see we have lots of other kind of eclectic imagery. So we have this strange speedometer down the bottom with tomorrow and weather. We have space travel, we have Venus, we have military trucks brought together. I mean, it's really, it's a moment in American history, isn't it?
Well, he's drawing on the tradition of collage, but with the twist that he's, in a sense, transferring images from photography, really, and found photographic sources through the silkscreen process onto the surface of a canvas. So it's complicated and disrupted all of these different genres and media. To leave us something that really demands our own engagement with it, to kind of make sense of it, to activate meaning from the image.
And fascinating that he gathers this imagery from sports journalism, from newspapers, from magazines, brings it together. He's politically engaged. He's a great admirer of Kennedy, so he's not a pop artist. He might use that methodology or be a precursor, but this is a very different way, I think, of making images. Although, as you say, it's kind of beautifully messy, and the silk screen is misregistered. So there's this idea of an imperfect world.
And the implication of this series is that any material, all the stuff of life, can be brought into the world of art and given kind of a value and meaning and relevance. You know, he's connecting us to the culture of the time, beyond the studio, out into the street, out into the real world. And it's very dynamic because of that, I think.
Absolutely. And at this point, he's given, around this point, he's given the prize, the Venice Biennale Prize for Painting, which again delighted some of his audience and was completely surprising to a more traditional gallery audience. But he really moved on the idea of putting images together, of painting and of printing.
And finally, as you indicated, it's less ironic than, say, the pop art of Andy Warhol. It's less sort of detached and kind of analytical, but rather you can see him almost like on a sort of a pinboard, arranging materials. And we do this today more than ever, the way in which we organize our world through sort of visual media that we surround ourselves with.
We're standing in front of Mud Muse, which was made between 68 and 71, and is a really interesting collaboration between Rauschenberg and Culver, a scientist, part of experiments in art and technology, this great collaboration. Very noisy, very visceral response to this piece.
Well, it's entrancing, isn't it? It returns us to childhood, to being on the beach, splashing around in the bath. It's quite abject at the same time because it reminds you of the kind of sort of anarchic character of the body, of gases, of elemental materials, of the sort of earliest origins of life itself. And that's what I think interesting. But when you look at it in its installation, you have this giant tank of bentonite clay juxtaposed with, as it were, a very sophisticated piece of technology at the time, whereby the circuit responds to its own sound. Yes, so the bubbles generate a reaction within the tank.
We're here in 2017 looking at this piece of work, but when it was made, I mean, a radical idea, the idea that the audience would be so involved, and actually initially they were very involved. They put their hands into it, they smeared mud on the walls, then a guard was introduced. But it is really a very basic piece, and he wanted it to be very primal, for our response to be very primal. And it does kind of draw you in, and as you say, lots of associations with bodily functions, with mud, with Yellowstone Park, with geysers, with hot water. It's quite a fascinating piece.
And of course the moon landings that take place during the period he's making it. The idea of a fascination with materiality and the character of the world around us, whether it's in the city or whether in nature.
And I like the idea that you can see the workings out. In some ways it's very sophisticated, but you can see the machinery, you can see the way it's set up. So you really are involved in the piece. So Rauschenberg, this exciting artist, this risk taker, somebody who has a great joy in making art, in objects, materials for their own sake. And I think if we look at contemporary work made now, wouldn't have happened without Rauschenberg. You can really see that trajectory, those connections. And somebody who really enjoyed working with other people.
I really admire his spirit of generosity, of openness. The work is so kind of responsive to the world around him. And that's what's so, important about his work and its legacy. I think he is an artist who continually tests the character of art and of its potential in a really exciting and even moving way.
I think to see somebody who doesn't know what the answers are, who isn't prepared to give you an answer, but just keeps pushing, is still relevant and is still very engaging.
He's really a bridge between the early avant-garde movements of the 20th century to contemporary art today. You see so much of his influence around us in the art world, in the present, and I think his achievements are enormous. Thank you for watching the Art Channel. If you've enjoyed this film, please give us a thumbs up. You can also share and distribute the film. Thank you also for your continuing support. You can follow us on social media, on Facebook, on Instagram, and on Twitter.